You may have heard it said that you're either in a storm or you're getting ready to walk through one. That's not pessimism, but that's reality. Life has seasons of calm, but it also has seasons when everything you thought was solid suddenly feels like it's shifting beneath your feet. The call for us came on a Tuesday. Leadership upheaval, financial crisis, everything we'd built suddenly felt fragile. You know that moment when your carefully constructed plans meet unexpected chaos? Well, that was us. And here's what we learned. You don't discover what anchors you when life is smooth. You discover it when everything you thought matters is being stripped away. We'd been practicing Sabbath for just a few months when this storm hit. And it became our lifeline, while it felt like our world was falling apart. When everything in our lives seemed to be breaking loose, we still had those sacred hours when the world's demands were temporarily suspended, and we could remember who we were, who God is, and what really mattered beyond our challenges. This chapter is about finding your anchor, because you will need it one day, maybe even today.
Sabbath isn't escapism, it's sanctuary in the storm. Chapter 3: Anchored in the Storm. It's not a matter of if you will experience a storm in life, but when the next one will come. Maybe you're going through one right now. When our storm hit, we had no warning. That's often how life's challenges arrive. We were happily sailing along with no idea of the gale-force winds gathering just over the horizon. The storm began with a devastating loss, shattering my confidence in ways I never could have imagined. Still reeling from that, a few weeks later, a leadership crisis erupted, stripping away not only my position, but my identity, my calling, and our financial security in a single crushing blow. Dreams I'd invested years building suddenly collapsed under the weight of circumstances beyond my control. What followed was a cascade of mounting pressures, decisions concerning immediate survival and tensions regarding long-term direction, sleepless nights filled with endless replaying of conversations and scenarios, the raging cycle of shoulda, coulda, woulda, desperately wishing for a redo that would never come. Then, in the midst of all that, just weeks later, an unexpected life change triggered a season of depression for Selah. This added another layer of darkness to an already suffocating cloud of uncertainty settling over our future. We were drowning, gasping for air. We had no idea that the very practice we'd just begun would become the thing that held us together. For us, Sabbath became our anchor. Even though we were still starting our rhythm, we had committed to regularly showing up in God's presence, regardless of how we felt or what was happening around us. In those sacred hours, when everything else in our lives seemed to be breaking loose, the world's demands were temporarily suspended. We could remember who we were beyond our challenges. This anchor held us through a season that could have destroyed us. It provided stability not by calming the waters, but by connecting us to something stronger than the chaos. The design of the anchor. Have you ever watched a small boat riding out rough seas? It rises and falls with each wave, the rain pelts its deck, the wind howls through its rigging. But if it's properly anchored, it doesn't crash against the rocks or get swept out to sea. The anchor keeps the boat where it needs to be until the weather clears. And that's exactly what Sabbath does for us in the storms of life. I've been thinking a lot about anchors lately. Did you know most anchors work through their design rather than their weight? The flukes, those pointed parts at the end, dig into the seabed, and the more pressure applied from above, the deeper they dig in. The anchor doesn't stop the storm, but it uses the storm's force to create stability. The very pressure that threatens to destroy the vessel becomes the force that drives the anchor deeper. This is the surprising power of Sabbath in challenging seasons. The very pressure that threatens to pull us away from God's presence drives us into greater dependence on Him. The very storms that threaten to sweep us away can instead secure us more firmly to our unshakable foundation. You don't prepare for a crisis when you're in one. The habits you've established in calmer waters are what carry you when the seas get rough. We've found no habit more life-preserving than the weekly rhythm of pressing pause to anchor ourselves in God's presence. When waves crash. What's most disorienting with the storms we faced wasn't just their intensity, but how quickly they stripped away our carefully constructed identities. When you've defined yourself by achievement, influence, and accolades, who are you when those things are suddenly taken away? But it wasn't only the practical pressure threatening to sink us, it was the questions crashing against our faith with each passing day. Had we misheard God's calling? Were we on the wrong path entirely? Were these challenges a reflection of our leadership, our character, our worth? In this moment of crisis, we learned there were essentially 3 ways we could respond. Number 1, push harder, believing more effort, more hustle, more control will somehow fix what's broken. Number 2, check out. Look for ways to numb the pain through distraction, addiction, or disengagement. Or number 3, find an anchor. Grab a hold of something solid when everything is shifting. And this isn't a denial of reality, but a stable place from which to face it. Friday evenings became our lighthouse. We gather at our table and speak the ancient words that had become our language. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe. Simple reminders that God was here with us. His presence provided shelter in the storm. I remember one Sabbath evening vividly. More difficult conversations, more decisions we were unsure of, more nights of tossing and turning, running scenarios over and over. We gathered at the table. The kids, sensing the heaviness, were unusually quiet. When it came time for blessings, my voice struggled to find gratitude when everything felt so broken. Then our daughter Naya looked up and said with conviction, "I'm thankful that God takes care of us, even when we don't know how He's going to do it." In that moment, it was as if a spotlight illuminated the truth we needed to hear. The storm hadn't diminished. The waves were still crashing, the wind still howling, but our anchor had dug deeper. We were held secure by a hope far more substantial than the weight of our circumstances. In the midst of chaos, Sabbath was the sanctuary in the storm. Sometimes we came with tears, sometimes with anger, sometimes with numb exhaustion. But we came. And in that coming, something happened that's difficult to articulate but impossible to deny. We were held by something larger than ourselves, held by the steady, faithful presence of God who promised to meet us there. Was it denial of reality? Not at all. The bills were still there. The difficult decisions couldn't be avoided. Our situation hadn't changed. But for those sacred hours, we gained perspective that couldn't be found in the churning waters of our daily concerns. From that anchored place, the same problems looked different, still significant, but manageable in the hands of a God bigger than our storm. Walking through that season, we learned something crucial about Sabbath. It doesn't change our circumstances, but transforms how we experience them. Just as an anchor keeps a boat from being dashed against the rocks, Sabbath keeps us from being broken by fears which, in the larger perspective, were temporary concerns rather than eternal truths. In the darkness of depression. Not all storms are external. Some of the most violent tempests rage inside us, hidden from view but no less destructive. For nearly a year, I walked with Selah as she went through a deep season of anxiety and depression. There were weeks when simply getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain. Her mind, once filled with creative ideas and strategic plans, became a landscape of fog and shadow. Depression is a peculiar kind of storm. It goes beyond changing your circumstances. It changes how you experience everything. Colors seem less vibrant. Conversations require enormous effort. The simplest tasks become monumental challenges. When you're drowning internally, there's a strange impulse to push away the very people who might throw you a rescue rope. You don't want to burden them. You convince yourself they'd be better off without the weight of your darkness. You don't want to be seen in your weakness. The thought of creating a special Sabbath evening when she could barely microwave leftovers felt impossible. Setting a beautiful table, speaking words of blessing, finding gratitude in the darkness, it seemed almost absurd. But here's where the anchor held steady. Sabbath wasn't something she had to create. It was a rhythm taking root in our family life. The space for God's presence was being created, whether she could sense it or not. During those months, she would often come to the Sabbath table on the verge of tears. And in those moments, the practice we had established held her when she couldn't hold herself. The blessings whispered hope. The candlelight reminded her darkness never has the final word. One Friday, in the depths of that season, she couldn't bring herself to prepare anything special. She sat at the table empty-handed and empty-hearted. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I took her hands and said words that would become our anchor. "All that matters is being with God, who's already here waiting for you." The comfort and healing presence of God held her through that heavy and weary season of life. What became clear was Sabbath isn't reserved for perfect circumstances or emotional stability. It's a sacred refuge, especially necessary in our most broken, confused, and painful seasons. Holding on to hope. The anchor of Sabbath is part of God's design for our flourishing in a fallen world. I think of Peter stepping out on the boat into the raging sea. As long as his eyes were fixed on Jesus, he walked on water. The moment he focused on the waves, he began to sink. Sabbath helps us fix our eyes on Jesus when the storms of life would have us fixate on the waves. Here are some ways it holds us steady in turbulent times. Sabbath connects the temporal to the eternal. In the midst of crises that feel all-consuming, Sabbath widens our perspective beyond the immediate to the eternal. It reminds us that while our challenges are real, they're not ultimate. There's a bigger story unfolding, and our current chapter isn't the conclusion. Sabbath provides renewal of perspective. Unlike a one-time retreat or momentary spiritual high, Sabbath returns us to truth on a regular basis. As we need daily food for our bodies, we need weekly truth for our souls. Sabbath creates space for presence when we're tempted to run. Our natural response to pain is often avoidance or numbing. Sabbath creates a sanctuary for facing our reality in the safe presence of God and those who love us. It invites us to bring our full selves, yes, our fears, our doubts, and our confusions, to the table and find them held in grace. Sabbath reminds us who we are when storms threaten our identity. When crises hit, they often attack our sense of self. Financial struggles make us feel like failures. Health challenges reduce us to patience. Relationship conflicts leave us feeling unlovable. Sabbath continually reconnects us with our identity as God's beloved children. God meets us where we are. What storms are you facing right now? Is it a relationship grown distant? Financial pressures keeping you awake at night? A health diagnosis that's shaken your world? A big dream that feels overwhelming in its scope? A project or calling stretching you beyond your comfort zone? The exhausting demands of caregiving that never seem to end? Or perhaps it's not one dramatic crisis, but the accumulated weight of 1,000 small things, the constant demands, the unending responsibilities, the feeling you're always running behind, always falling short, always trying to keep too many plates spinning at once. We didn't have a guidebook for navigating these rough seas. The perfect storm of circumstances brought us to our knees, literally. In the darkest moments, we found ourselves on the floor, out of strategies, out of strength, out of answers. Have you been there? Are you there now? That place where your usual coping mechanisms fail, where motivational quotes ring empty, where even well-meaning advice from friends feels hollow. Let tears be part of your offering. Some weeks, the most honest thing you can bring to the table is your brokenness. Don't hide your pain. Include it. Light the candles through your tears. Speak the blessings through trembling voices. God meets us most powerfully in our vulnerability rather than our strength. Receive when you cannot give. There will be seasons when you have nothing to offer. In those times, Sabbath becomes less focused on what you bring and more centered on what you receive. Let the blessings wash over you. Let God's presence hold you when you cannot hold yourself. The strength of Sabbath is in showing up again and again to be with God, who is already there waiting for you. Here's what we've learned. God meets us exactly where we are in every moment of our lives. We're continually evolving as we fight battles, celebrate victories, and navigate the demands of everyday life. But every week, he pulls up a seat at our table to meet us. That's where eternity collides with our humanity. Many weeks, Sabbath feels like a celebration, a feast of joy and gratitude. Other weeks, it feels like a shelter, where we hide from the storm until the winds subside. And still other weeks, it feels like a hospital, a place for binding wounds and beginning healing. The invitation to Sabbath isn't just for fair weather sailing. It's for the roughest seas, the darkest nights, the most violent storms. When everything else is breaking loose, this anchor holds. When the storms of life threaten to sweep us away, Sabbath consistently connects us to the one who holds all power, the one whom even the wind and the waves obey. But here's the surprising part. Choosing this ancient rhythm in our modern world did more than change us. It put us at odds with everything around us. It turns out, rest is revolutionary.
Hey, it's Selah here. Thank you for reading this chapter of Pressing Pause with me today. This isn't just about changing your pace, it's about encountering God's presence. So we want to invite you to join us in this movement of people who are choosing sacred over scattered and beautiful connection over the relentless chaos. Head over to startsabbath.com and we've got everything you need to take your next steps, connect with us and so many others who are on this journey. We want to share the gift of perfect peace with the people who desperately need it the most, because extraordinary things happen when we dare to pause.